Me 61 male and my wife 59 female have been married for 38 years. We have 5 children, 3 boys aged 31/29 28 and 2 girls aged 36/40. The oldest is from my wife's first marriage. We have 17 grandchildren. I found out that my wife has been in an on and off affair with my father since our wedding day. She told me by mistake, not realizing what she said. After denying it, she suddenly came clean and told me everything. It started 4 hours after we got married at our reception that he started touching her behind. She said she told him to stop. But 6 months after our wedding they started an affair which lasted 1.5 years. Then 2 years after that my mother died and she said she felt sorry for him and they started up again. That we lost our second baby, but she told me it wasn't mine, it was my father's. They were on and off until he died in 2018. She also had a one-night stand 2 months into our relationship. I am so devastated, I just feel like ending it all. I've never felt so much pain in my life. I sat there in the quiet of our living room, her words hanging in the air like a storm cloud that refused to pass. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of a truth so cruel, so unimaginable, that it felt like I was stuck in a bad dream. My father. The man I admired, respected, and trusted. And my wife, my partner of nearly 4 decades, the mother of my children. How could they? The timeline of their betrayal unfurled in my head like a twisted movie reel. 4 hours after our wedding, while I was busy celebrating what was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives, he was violating every boundary I never thought needed to be said. She told me it started then, with him touching her behind. She said she told him to stop. But 6 months later, they crossed the line I didn't even know existed, and the betrayal began. I asked her why. The question came out more as a whisper than the scream I felt inside. She didn't have a good answer, at least, not one that could justify the wreckage her words had brought down on my soul. I felt sorry for him, she said, speaking about my father as if he were some lost, lonely soul who deserved her pity. After your mother died. I don't know. Her voice trailed off. It was then she admitted the child we lost wasn't mine. That broke me in a way I didn't think was possible. All this time, I had grieved for a son I thought was ours. Now, that grief felt stolen, twisted into something foreign and unbearable. After she said those words, the silence was suffocating. The woman I had loved for nearly 40 years sat across from me, her eyes wet with tears, but it was the kind of guilt that felt too late. I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't recognize her. I got up, walked to the window, and stared out into the yard. The oak tree we'd planted together so many years ago swayed in the wind, its roots deep in the ground, unshaken. I wished I felt that steady, that sure of anything. I started to speak, but my voice cracked under the weight of the words. Do you even know what you've done to me? To us? To our family? Her face crumpled as she whispered, I'm sorry. Sorry? I turned to her, my anger surging like a wave crashing against a dam. You're sorry? For 38 years, I've given you everything I had. I worked overtime to provide, I held you when we lost our baby, and I loved you when you didn't even love yourself. And now you tell me this? After all this time? I didn't want to hurt you, she said, her voice shaking. I was scared, and I didn't know how to stop it. And then it just kept happening. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Every beat felt like a hammer against a nail, driving home the betrayal. You didn't want to hurt me? Are you serious? You've been lying to me our entire marriage. You made me live a life that wasn't even real. She reached out as if to touch me, but I stepped back. I couldn't bear it. I don't even know who you are, I said, my voice cold. And I don't know how I'm supposed to move forward from this. How am I supposed to look at you, at our kids, at him? I stopped myself, realizing the futility of mentioning my father. He was gone, taking his part in this sordid mess to the grave. I couldn't stay in that room any longer. The air felt too heavy, like it was pressing down on my chest, making it impossible to breathe. I grabbed my coat and keys and walked out the door without saying another word. I needed to get out, to think, to scream, to do something other than drown in the ocean of betrayal. The night was cold, and the crisp air bit at my face as I drove aimlessly through the quiet streets of our small town. Memories of our life together flashed in my mind like cruel reminders of what I thought we had. The first time I saw her in that yellow sundress, the way she smiled at me when we brought our first child home from the hospital, the nights we stayed up talking about our dreams for the future. How much of it was real? How much of it was a lie? I pulled over into the parking lot of an old diner we used to visit when we were younger. It was mostly empty now, save for a few truckers and a waitress wiping down tables. I sat in the car for a while, staring at the neon sign flickering above the entrance, before finally going inside. The waitress, an older woman with kind eyes, approached me. "Coffee?" she asked. "Yeah," I muttered. "And keep it coming." As I sat there, nursing the hot, bitter drink, the weight of it all started to hit me in waves. My father, how could he do this to me? He was supposed to be my role model, my guide. And my wife, the one person I thought I could trust above all else. The betrayal felt too big, too overwhelming. I thought about my kids, my grandkids. How would they see me if they knew? Would they hate her? Would they hate me for not seeing it sooner? The door jingled as someone walked in, but I didn't look up. My thoughts were spiraling, dragging me deeper into a darkness I didn't know how to escape. "I can't do this," I whispered to myself, the words barely audible. "I can't." But then, somewhere in the back of my mind, a small voice pushed through the noise. "You have to. Not for her. Not for him. For you. For the man you are, because you deserve better than this." It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me sitting there instead of driving off into the unknown. Tom's words echoed in my head as I drove back home. One step at a time. It sounded simple enough, but where was I even supposed to begin? How do you rebuild a life when the foundation has been shattered? The house was quiet when I walked in. The lights in the living room were dim, and I could see her silhouette sitting on the couch. She didn't look up as I entered, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I hesitated in the doorway, unsure if I was ready for another conversation, but then I reminded myself that avoiding it wouldn't make this mess go away. "I'm back," I said quietly. She looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "I didn't know if you would come home." "Neither did I admitted. I sat down across from her, keeping a deliberate distance. For a long moment, we just stared at each other, the silence thick with unspoken words. "Why now?" I finally asked. "Why tell me all of this now, after all these years?" Her gaze dropped to her hands. "I didn't mean to. It just slipped out. And when I saw the look on your face, I knew I couldn't keep lying. You deserve to know the truth, no matter how much it hurts." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "And what am I supposed to do with that truth, huh? How am I supposed to look at you, at our life, and not see this betrayal?" She didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know. I don't have the right to ask for forgiveness, and I know I can't undo the pain I've caused. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right, if that's even possible." Her words hung in the air, but they didn't bring the comfort I thought they might. I wanted to believe her, to see some glimmer of the woman I had loved for so long, but all I could feel was the weight of what she had done. "I need time," I said finally. "Time to figure out what I want, what I need. And I can't do that with you hovering over me, waiting for an answer." She nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. "I understand. I'll give you as much time as you need." I stood up, the conversation leaving me more drained than I thought possible. "I'm going to stay in the guest room for now. I can't. I just can't be in the same bed as you right now." She didn't protest, just nodded again, her shoulders slumping under the weight of her guilt. That night, lying alone in the guest room, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. Tom was right, this wasn't something I could fix overnight. But maybe, just maybe, taking it one day at a time was the only way forward. Tom's words echoed in my head as I drove back home. One step at a time. It sounded simple enough, but where was I even supposed to begin? How do you rebuild a life when the foundation has been shattered? The house was quiet when I walked in. The lights in the living room were dim, and I could see her silhouette sitting on the couch. She didn't look up as I entered, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I hesitated in the doorway, unsure if I was ready for another conversation, but then I reminded myself that avoiding it wouldn't make this mess go away. "I'm back," I said quietly. She looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "I didn't know if you would come home." "Neither did I admitted. I sat down across from her, keeping a deliberate distance. For a long moment, we just stared at each other, the silence thick with unspoken words. "Why now?" I finally asked. "Why tell me all of this now, after all these years?" Her gaze dropped to her hands. "I didn't mean to. It just slipped out. And when I saw the look on your face, I knew I couldn't keep lying. You deserve to know the truth, no matter how much it hurts." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "And what am I supposed to do with that truth, huh? How am I supposed to look at you, at our life, and not see this betrayal?" She didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know. I don't have the right to ask for forgiveness, and I know I can't undo the pain I've caused. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right, if that's even possible." Her words hung in the air, but they didn't bring the comfort I thought they might. I wanted to believe her, to see some glimmer of the woman I had loved for so long, but all I could feel was the weight of what she had done. "I need time," I said finally. "Time to figure out what I want, what I need. And I can't do that with you hovering over me, waiting for an answer." She nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. "I understand. I'll give you as much time as you need." I stood up, the conversation leaving me more drained than I thought possible. "I'm going to stay in the guest room for now. I can't. I just can't be in the same bed as you right now." She didn't protest, just nodded again, her shoulders slumping under the weight of her guilt. That night, lying alone in the guest room, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. Tom was right, this wasn't something I could fix overnight. But maybe, just maybe, taking it one day at a time was the only way forward. The next morning, the house felt eerily quiet. For nearly 4 decades, this had been our home, filled with laughter, arguments, the chaos of raising kids, and eventually the pitter-patter of grandchildren's feet. Now, it felt hollow, as if the walls themselves knew what had happened. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the steam rising from my coffee. Across from me was her usual spot, now conspicuously empty. She must have gone upstairs after I came down, sensing I wasn't ready to face her again. It wasn't long before my phone buzzed on the table. It was a group chat with my kids, our kids. They were all planning the next family gathering for New Year's, bouncing ideas back and forth. A sharp pang hit me. How could I sit with them, smile, and pretend everything was normal when the truth was eating me alive? I set the phone down, the screen still glowing with messages, and rubbed my temples. The idea of telling them felt unbearable. This was their mother, the woman who raised them, who sacrificed for them, who loved them fiercely. And it was my father, their grandfather. How could I burden them with this twisted truth? Would they hate her? Hate me for staying silent? I called Tom again. He picked up on the second ring. "How you holding up?" he asked. "Barely," I admitted. "I don't know what to do about the kids. Should I tell them? Should I keep it to myself? What if it blows everything apart? Tom sighed. That's a tough one, man. Look, they're adults. They'll find out eventually. Secrets like this have a way of coming out. The question is, how much damage are you willing to let it do before that happens? Maybe it's better if they hear it from you. The thought churned in my gut. He was right, but that didn't make it any easier. That evening, I decided to test the waters with my oldest daughter, Lauren. She was the one who'd always had a good head on her shoulders, the family mediator whenever things got tense. If anyone could handle this, it was her. I called her, and when she answered, her voice was cheerful. "Hey, Dad. What's up?" "Hey, sweetheart," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You got a minute to talk?" "Of course. Is everything okay?" "Not really," I admitted. "I've been dealing with something. And I need to talk to someone about it." Her tone shifted instantly, her concern palpable. "What's going on?" I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. How do you tell your child something that might forever change the way they see their family? "It's about your mom," I said finally. "And your grandpa." The line went silent for a moment. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice cautious. I took a deep breath and told her everything, sparing no detail. I didn't sugarcoat it, didn't try to soften the blow. By the time I finished, my hands were shaking, and I could hear her trying to process what I'd just said. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Dad. I don't even know what to say." "Neither do I," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't even know why I'm telling you this. Maybe I needed someone to know." There was a long pause before she finally spoke. "Thank you for telling me. I can't imagine how hard this must be for you. For all of us. But I think we're going to have to talk about this as a family. Not right away, but eventually." Her words were gentle, but they carried a weight I wasn't sure I was ready for. Still, I knew she was right. This secret wasn't just mine anymore, it belonged to all of us now. Over the next few days, Lauren and I spoke more, carefully trying to make sense of what had happened. She was calm, far more composed than I expected, but there was an edge to her voice, a mix of hurt and disbelief. "How are you feeling, Dad?" she asked during one of our late-night calls. "Torn," I admitted. "Some moments I feel like I can deal with it, and others. I don't even know who I am anymore. I keep wondering if I should have seen something, if there were signs I missed." "It's not your fault," she said firmly. "You trusted her. You trusted Grandpa. Why wouldn't you? No one could have predicted this." Her words brought a small sense of relief, but the guilt still lingered. "I'm worried about the others," I said. "Telling them feels like opening Pandora's box. It could change everything." Lauren paused before responding. "Dad, they deserve to know the truth. It's going to hurt, but keeping it from them will hurt even more if it comes out later. And you shouldn't have to carry this alone." She was right, of course, but knowing that didn't make it any easier. A week later, I decided it was time to gather the family. It was an unusually cold evening when they all arrived, my sons, my daughters, their spouses, and a handful of grandkids who ran through the house, laughing and playing like nothing was wrong. I stood in the kitchen, watching the scene unfold, feeling like an outsider in my own life. When dinner was over and the grandkids were tucked away in the playroom, I called everyone into the living room. "What's going on, Dad?" my son Michael asked, his brow furrowed. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I took a deep breath and looked around the room. "There's something I need to tell you. Something I've been struggling with for weeks now." The room fell silent, the air thick with anticipation. My wife sat on the edge of the couch, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Lauren sat beside her, her expression unreadable. I recently found out something that's shaken me to my core, I began. It's about your mother. And your grandfather. Confusion flickered across their faces. My youngest son, Daniel, spoke first. What do you mean? What about Grandpa? I hesitated, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on me. Your mother, she had an ongoing affair with him. It started shortly after we got married and went on and off, for decades. The words felt like a cannon blast in the room. Gasps filled the air, followed by stunned silence. No, Michael said, shaking his head. That can't be true. Grandpa? Mom? That's insane. It's true, Lauren said softly. All eyes turned to her. Dad told me about it last week. I've been trying to process it ever since. How could you? Daniel's voice broke as he looked at his mother, his face a mixture of anger and disbelief. How could you do that to Dad? To us? To this family? Tears streamed down my wife's face. I don't expect you to forgive me, she said, her voice trembling. I know I've hurt you all in ways I can't undo. But I loved your father. I still do. I made terrible mistakes. Loved him? Michael snapped. You don't do that to someone you love. And with his father? God, Mom, that's sick. The room descended into chaos as emotions erupted, anger, hurt, confusion. I sat there, watching my family fracture in real time, wondering if I had made the right decision in telling them. But amidst the shouting, Lauren's voice cut through. Stop, she said firmly. We're not going to figure this out tonight. But this is our family, and we need to decide if we're going to let this break us or find a way to move forward. It's not going to be easy, but we owe it to each other to try. Her words hung in the air, and slowly, the room quieted. The days following that family meeting felt like walking through a storm. Everyone was shaken. Conversations became clipped and cautious, as if any wrong word could shatter what was left of our fragile connections. Michael and Daniel were the angriest. Michael, always the protective one, couldn't stop lashing out. You should have left her, he told me during a tense phone call. How could you stay with someone who betrayed you like that? What kind of example does that set for the rest of us? Daniel, the youngest, was quieter in his rage, but it simmered beneath every interaction. He refused to speak to his mother at all. Every text, every call from her went unanswered. Lauren tried to act as the glue, checking in on everyone, urging them to keep the lines of communication open. But even she was starting to crack under the pressure. Dad, I'm trying, she said during one of her visits. But it feels like this family is falling apart, and I don't know how to stop it. And then there was me, stuck in the middle of the wreckage, trying to figure out where I stood. My wife and I barely spoke. She gave me space, but her sadness was palpable. Every time I walked past her, sitting alone in the living room or at the dining table, I felt the weight of her guilt pressing down on both of us. One evening, I found myself in the garage, the place I'd always gone to clear my head. The smell of sawdust and motor oil was oddly comforting, a reminder of simpler times. I sat on the old stool in the corner, staring at the half-finished birdhouse I'd started months ago for one of the grandkids. Tom's words echoed in my mind, one step at a time. I picked up the hammer and started working, not because I cared about the birdhouse, but because I needed to do something, anything, to pull myself out of my head. The rhythmic pounding of nails into wood was strangely therapeutic. For a few moments, it felt like I had some semblance of control. Later that night, I sat at the kitchen table with my wife. For the first time in weeks, I initiated the conversation. I don't know what the future looks like, I said, my voice steady but tired. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you. But I think it's time we both start figuring out what comes next, whether that's together or apart. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I just want to make things right, whatever that means. Even if it means letting you go. Her words struck me. She meant it. For once, there was no defensiveness, no excuses, just a raw, painful honesty. The next day, I reached out to a family counselor. It wasn't easy convincing everyone to come, but eventually, they agreed. The first session was tense, filled with anger and tears, but it was a start. The counselor asked each of us what we wanted moving forward. The answers varied, some wanted healing, others just wanted space. But the one common thread was this: no one wanted to lose the family we'd built together. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to take another step forward. It's been a few months since we started therapy as a family. The road has been long and, at times, unbearably difficult, but we've learned to navigate the wreckage of the past with the smallest glimmers of hope. Michael and Daniel are still angry, but they're starting to come around. They've learned to channel that anger into conversations, some of which are still painful, but at least they're talking. It's not perfect, and there are days when it feels like the weight of everything is too much to bear, but we're moving forward. Slowly. Lauren, my rock through all of this, has helped keep things together. She's learned to give us space when we need it but also knows when to push us to face the tough stuff. Without her, I don't think we would have made it this far. As for me, I'm learning how to breathe again. I've had to reckon with my own feelings of betrayal, grief, and confusion. And though I haven't figured it all out, I know one thing: I can't let this define me. My life isn't over just because my world got turned upside down. My future is still mine to shape. My wife and I are in a strange place. We talk more now, about everything and nothing at all. Sometimes, we don't know where this road is going, but we're walking it together, for now. Some days, I still feel the sting of what's happened, but other days, I feel a flicker of the love we once shared, buried deep under the hurt but not entirely gone. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe one day we'll heal enough to rebuild what we had, or maybe this will be the chapter that ends our story. But either way, I'm learning how to live again, one small step at a time.